Good morning, or afternoon, or evening. It's evening here, wherever you are, and welcome to FreeThought Hour. So, welcome to Tercia, my usual co-host. How the devil are you?
I'm still good, still cold,
Yeah,
but not it, still dry as well. Well,
yeah,
well, my house is dry. The environment is
good.
not dry.
Oh, right.
The ground is completely saturated. We've had
Yeah.
rain
You had
non-stop basically for the
you had
past.
more since last week.
We did, yeah, we did. We
I would
haven't
have
had, but
you're
we've
you're
had.
you're gluttons. I would have thought that was enough.
Well, we would like it to be enough for just a week or so. Sunshine would be good.
Okay. Anyway,
But
let's introduce David, our special guest for tonight. He's a professor of philosophy, and I'm very pleased that he's agreed to come on the show. Welcome, David. How the devil are you?
How the devil am I? I guess I'm okay.
Good. Good. Well, you're on the east coast of the US of A, aren't you?
That's
Yes,
right.
Philadelphia sort of area? Or...
No. I'm in New Hampshire.
Oh, right, further north. Yeah. Okay, nice part of the world too, except that the weather's a bit extreme compared to balmy Sussex.
Well, yes, although you've been having a heat wave in the UK.
Yeah, we have. Yes, we've. Yeah, it's all gone berserk, hasn't it? Let's face it. Yeah. Anyway, the reason that you're here is because I spotted you somewhere. It might have been in Twitter. Was it Twitter? Yeah.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Yeah. And I thought you sound like an interesting fellow. And I looked at your what's it called? The
Substack.
Substack. Yeah, that's right. And I read some fantastic articles there. And you seem to be focusing on dehumanization.
That's right. For the last 20 years, that's been my area of research.
That's your thing, isn't it? Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I don't know if you know, but I'm the executive president of Atheism UK. So I'm very much against dehumanization. But the trouble is, it's one of the tactics that the religious use. Well, it starts as just sort of mild division. We're right and you're wrong. But then it escalates to the fundamental level of you're not just wrong, but you should be dead.
Well, we have to be clear about what we mean by dehumanization.
Yeah.
And wishing death on people is not the same as dehumanizing them. And I would add, no group, the religious. Well, there are secular people who also indulge regularly in dehumanizing rhetoric and dehumanizing ideas.
Yeah,
so I wouldn't want to say that it's exclusive to religious people.
No, it's not just theirs, is it? Anybody can be dogmatic, let's face it.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Carry on, I interrupted you.
Okay, so I think we have to be clear about what dehumanization is. And that's not that easy because the word's used in lots of different ways. What I mean by dehumanization is the attitude of conceiving of others as subhuman creatures.
Yeah.
So you can perfectly well, kill people without doing that, or degrade them, or enslave them, or whatever. Although the process of dehumanization helps these atrocities along.
Yes, because you have less guilt, don't you? Because they're not part of your species.
Well, it's that's part of it, but it's also in the worst forms of dehumanization, you feel that you have a moral obligation to harm and exterminate others. Every genocide that I've studied certainly has involved a kind of righteousness on the part of the perpetrators, that they are setting out to save the world from evil.
Yeah. Well, Tercia is a campaigner for atheism too in South Africa, and I know that when she comes back, I think she might be having a bit of connectivity trouble.
Yeah.
But she will be interested in how you got to be Professor David Livingstone-Smith. That's an interesting story. I mean, the name in itself tells of an interesting heritage, I should think.
Yeah. Do you want to wait for Tercia, or do you want me
No,
to
oh, she's back.
start on
Okay.
that now?
So, shall I hand over to you, Tercia, you can ask a few questions? Or oh,
Yes,
you can't.
I was
We can hear you. Good.
Sorry,
Oh.
guys, I switched to an internet router. I'm hoping the connection is more stable.
Okay.
I would just like to hear what you said, John. The last thing I heard was you said that I'm a campaigner for atheism in South Africa, and then I switched to the router, and there was a little bit of a disconnect. So if I can just catch up with what you said there, and then I would like to jump in there.
Okay, yeah. Well, I just said that you're also a campaigner in the cause of loosely in the cause of atheism in South Africa. I was thinking of your Kreuzfrei, but and that you would be interested in how David got to be the David he is today.
Yeah, absolutely. And so dehumanization, David, I'm not sure that I understand it 100%. And I have to confess that I wanted to do a little bit of research about the topic, but I'm an activist and a full-time teacher as well, so my week was too short. But it doesn't have to do. What is the premise of dehumanization as in philosophy?
Well, there isn't any general premise,
Okay.
and philosophers have not been the most engaged group with this. It's mostly social psychologists. I'm kind of an oddball in that I don't really think that the social psychologists are. I think a lot of the work they do is questionable. Let's put it that way.
Ooh.
And so I'm in philosophy. I'm like Mr. Dehumanization, right? Because there are not very many people involved, and as far as I'm aware, apart from one edited collection, I'm the only philosopher who has written books on this topic. I've written 3 books.
Interesting. And I need to know the name of these books so that I can make a banner to go along the bottom.
Okay. Yeah, certainly. Well, the first one was published in 2011, and it was called Less Than Human: Why We Demean, Enslave, and Exterminate Others. And that book was honored with the 2012 Anisfield Wolf Award for Nonfiction, which is an award reserved for books that make substantial contributions to the study of racism and race and related topics. And the next book was in 2020. That book is called On Inhumanity: Dehumanization and How to Resist It.
On Inhumanity.
Inhumanity, yes, that's Oxford University Press. And the third book was published in 2021 by Harvard University Press, and it's called Making Monsters: The Uncanny Power of Dehumanization. Great
titles.
Yeah, well, it's the publishers who choose. Sometimes they take our advice, sometimes they don't.
That was going to be my next question. Who came up with it? Because it is usually.
I think all 3 I came up with.
Oh, did you? Well done.
And the editors conceded.
Proved. Oh, good. Because normally they want something really catchy to sell, don't they?
They do, yeah. And I want something catchy to sell too.
Yes. Shared interest.
Yeah.
Yes.
So knowing nothing about dehumanization or dehumanization, not dehumanization. Yeah. So the only positive that I can see the only way I can see using the word dehumanization in a positive way is if it helps us to acknowledge that we as a species are just primates, and that we are in no way really special. Only to us, we are special to ourselves, and we've had a massive impact on our environments. But I would like us to think about ourselves as part of an ecosystem.
Right.
And if I don't know, I'm just.
I think you've made up a new term there, Tercia. It's something like de-exclusivization. Something like that.
That
So
yeah, but I don't know. I think we're way. I think we need to change a few more minds to acknowledge the fact that we are, albeit very unique in the ecosystems that we live in, and that I do think that we possibly, although that's also debatable, because a virus can wipe us all out, and then who's more powerful,
yeah,
the virus or us?
well, every kind of organism is unique. I mean, that's how evolution works, right?
Yes.
So so the idea of human specialness is by no means, it's not a scientific notion, right?
Oh.
Science can't tell us that some kinds of organisms have greater inherent value than others. But this notion of a hierarchy, the idea that there's human and there's below the human,
Yes.
is really crucial to dehumanization. If you think about it, to think of others as less than human, you have to have this idea
Yes. Yes.
that of ranks in
Right.
nature.
You need an under category, don't you?
That's right. That's right. And I think that there are important reasons why we tend to think of that in that fashion. And we've probably thought in this way since the emergence of agriculture,
Yeah.
which is what I call the problem of killing. That is, in order for us to survive and flourish, we have to kill other organisms. Even if you're a vegan, you have to kill other organisms. And this hierarchical notion is kind of a way of attempting to justify this necessity of killing and exploiting other organisms. And that's why I think it's so profoundly rooted in our ways of thinking. After all, if a mosquito were to land on your arm, I imagine you would swat it.
Yes.
And if I were to ask you, how could you take the price, the life of that precious creature, you would say something to the effect, well, it's just a mosquito, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
So that's that's the hierarchical idea in operation.
Yes. But of course, in dehumanization, what you're doing is selecting some of your own species and demoting them.
That's right. That's right. Now we historically and in the contemporary world demote members of our own species in a way that falls short of dehumanization. I think the whole ideology of race works that way. We assign people to lower ranks in the category of the human. And in my 2020 book on Inhumanity, I described dehumanization as racism on steroids. And so far as the dehumanized person is extruded from the category of the human altogether, right? They are subhuman, they are less than human.
Yes.
And that gives permission to treat them in ways that would be very difficult for us to treat members of our species that we consider to be human beings.
Yes, or at least of our tribe, because there may be some members of our tribe who accept a subsidiary role agreeably, because maybe they're getting some favor in return. So that's not the same thing.
Well, we have to distinguish between different types of subsidiary roles.
Yes.
So the hierarchy that I'm talking about is a hierarchy of intrinsic value. That's the value that a thing has just in itself.
Oh.
Right? Not instrumental value. The instrumental value is something, this is philosopher talk, right?
Yeah, yes.
The instrumental value of something is what it can get you.
Yeah, right? Yes. I've had the conversations like this with other philosophers.
Yeah.
And I can't get my head around it. I think that a thing only has value if somebody wants it.
Well, I don't think value is an objective. I don't think there are facts about value. But there's certainly, we attribute value to things, right? So, and in the case of ourselves, we attribute a lot of intrinsic value to ourselves.
Yes, we're very egocentric, aren't we? We aren't the chosen
Well,
species.
if you look historically, this idea of that the world is arranged as a hierarchy, it's associated with a notion called the great chain of being. And I disagree with the historians of ideas, the way they handle that exactly.
Mhm.
But the basic, if we look at, say, the way this idea took shape in the Middle Ages,
Mm-hmm.
the idea was there are different degrees of perfection, as they call it.
Oh, yes.
Right? And so God, of course, was placed at the top because God was
Yes.
supposed to be perfectly perfect.
Yes.
And then there were the archangels, and then there were the angels, and then
Yes.
we modestly placed ourselves just below the angels, and so on and down, down and down and down. Then Nietzsche comes along, and God's dead.
Yes.
And what happens is not the demise of the hierarchy. It's just that human beings place themselves at the top.
Yes. We've got rid of the absolutely perfect bit.
Yeah, and we're as close as it comes, again, in full human modesty.
If anything, we've been promoted, haven't we? Because the number one is
that's right. Yes.
So, and I like the idea that we're sub-angels. I've just lost me wings.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
David, I'm thinking about talking about dehumanization. I just had a conversation earlier this week with my father-in-law about the caste system in India,
Mm-hmm.
which is centuries old. I mean, and technically, I would say that is a form of racism, because
For
I
sure.
do know that the caste system is based on
Birth.
on how birth and
Yes.
also color of one's skin. But what I'm curious about is, what do you say about this, the close connection that we as humans have between dehumanization and appearance, and in particular the appearance of the color of one's skin? And I think it goes way back, because you must be familiar with the story in the epics and the Greek gods, where Prometheus creates these beings, and they are beautiful, and there are blue ones and green ones, and they're all baked in the oven, and the ones that are baked longest come out darkest, and then the other ones are lighter because they weren't baked in the oven or in the sun so long. And then Zeus comes along and he says, "Oh, these creatures you created are so cool and so cute," and he doesn't watch his step, and he destroys the blue, purple, and green ones. And the only ones that are left are the yellow ones, the white ones, and the brown and the dark brown ones. And that's the ancient Greek explanation for why we don't have green and purple.
Okay.
But even from that time, I mean, as early as, I'd guess, 2,000 years ago, there's this idea that the lighter your skin, the more or better human you are. And that has manifested in different ways. Although, then again, I suppose in the Roman era, a black slave who becomes a freeman would be seen, if you're free, if you're not a slave, then you have the same status, that you are as human as a white non-slave. But I'm curious about your opinion about this, and because social psychologists have something to say about this. And you just said that you're not so impressed with the work of social psychologists.
Not the work on dehumanization. No, I think the humanization,
okay.
The work on dehumanization, I think, is multiply flawed. So let's get into this a little bit. First, it's worth noting that the ancient Greeks thought of Ethiopians as exceptionally fine and superior people, as the most moral people on earth. So in the ancient world, the association between hierarchy and appearance was by no means universal or sedimented in as it became later.
We ought to say that at that time, I think the Ethiopians were the Nubians and were very black.
Yeah, so Ethiopian for the Greeks meant sub-Saharan Africans.
Yes.
Generally.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Ethiopian, the term in Greek means burnt skin.
Yes, yes. And so they've been in the oven too long. I like the idea that we're all little gingerbread men.
So look, so here, where shall I start with this? So if we're going to talk about racial notions, and I put it that way because I'm a race skeptic. I think that the very notion of race
Yes.
is not only an empty fiction, but an extremely toxic and destructive one.
Yes.
I would just like to put it. I agree with you 100% on that, and I think that anybody who still actually uses the word, it's so unscientific that there's no such thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we need to do, if we're trying to look at, even a race skeptic like myself grants that notions of race have played a huge and uniquely terrible role
Yes.
in human history and society.
Yes.
So that makes it worth studying.
Yes.
And so the first stop has to be, well, how does the concept of race work? What's being talked about? Now, any analysis of that has got to cover all the cases. And that includes, say, the attitude in the Christian world towards Jewish people in, say, the Middle Ages, let's say the 14th century. Now, and the attitude, of course, in the Christian world to Jewish people, I'm Jewish, by the way, to people during the 20th century, for Christ's sake, amongst white supremacists now and Nazis back in the 30s and 40s and so on.
And right? Gaza rears its head right now.
And Gaza, yes. And Gaza, both sides, by the way.
Yes. Can I just?
We got racialization on both sides.
Yes.
And it must include, say, people like my maternal grandmother.
Yes.
Who was a Romanian Jew, had very pale skin, had very blue eyes, had very blonde hair.
Yes. Can I just put a slightly different slant on this conversation for a little while, because I want to investigate specific terms in this topic area.
Sure.
And one you'll have familiarity with, of course, is anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
But I see anti-Semitism as having greater foundation, greater justification than the new boy on the block, which is Islamophobia.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as you know, there's some hereditary component to the Semitic tribe, but there isn't to the Muslim tribe.
Yeah, well, but the hereditary component is not sufficient for racialization. It's a component, so it's a component to be sure. But people who are Islamophobic tend to be very ignorant about these matters. For instance, they confuse Iranians with Arabs. You say, if you call an Iranian an Arab, they're going to bite your head off. Right?
Yes.
There's a lot of anti-Arab feeling amongst the, certainly the Iranian diaspora.
Yes.
Right. So look, given my grandmother's appearance, for example, and the general fact that Jewish people are indistinguishable from, the Nazis had this ridiculous project of trying to find biological markers for Judaism, which failed utterly.
Yes,
because Jews were indistinguishable outwardly from anyone they consider, members of the master race.
Until you take the boys' trousers off, of course.
Yeah, but of course that's not an inherent characteristic.
No.
You're not born like that.
You're not born like that. That's correct. That was the practice. That was the Nazi practice. It didn't work with females, though, of course.
No.
So look, let's cut to the chase. The way I think that race works, the idea of race is that there are a small number of fundamentally different kinds of people. Membership in one of these categories is determined by descent. So you're the race of one or both of your parents. Different societies work it differently.
Yes.
So in the United States, for instance, in the Deep South, there was the one-drop rule. If you had a single
Yes.
black ancestor, of course, all of us have had black ancestors.
Yes. Yes.
You were black. So those are the two things. And the third is the idea of hierarchy.
Yes.
Right? Like there are higher races and lower races. Now, what's the connection between appearance then and skin color? Let me just make this final point.
Yeah.
Or else I'll forget where I am.
Me too.
I think that the way race works is that appearance is taken to be symptomatic of something deeper.
Uh-huh.
But race itself is supposed to be the possession of this deeper something, this fundamental difference.
Right.
That accounts for my grandmother, right? And indeed, the idea that Jews were very adept at deceiving Christians about their true nature because they, looking at them, usually couldn't tell them apart. And it also accounts for the phenomenon of passing, that someone racialized as black, say, who has fair skin, might pass themselves off as white, but would still be if they were found out. The idea was that they're really black,
and that happened in South Africa.
That happens in every racist regime.
Yes, and of course it works in reverse too, because there was this woman in the States who was very white but was passing herself off as black.
Yeah, there are a few examples of that historically. There was a Greek musician who did like jazz, and he found it advantageous for his career. He is quite dark skinned to do that. But for obvious reasons, it tends not to go in that direction because the subordinate group, it's in their interests, of course, to have a decent life and not to be oppressed.
Yes, indeed. Yes. So I wanted to just touch on the idea of, because you were saying about the hereditary aspect of this, and we talked about different cultures, but we didn't mention the different lineage too, because some cultures are matrilineal and most cultures, I think, are patrilineal.
Yes, that's right. There's some are matrilineal and some are patrilineal. Yeah.
So that makes a big difference anyway, doesn't it? I mean, aren't we in the territory of mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome?
Well, I think the thing to bear in mind is that if we're still talking about race,
and
we can contrast race with ethnicity in a moment.
Yes,
the whole race thing is nonsense, right?
Yes.
So anything we say about mitochondrial DNA versus nuclear DNA is actually irrelevant. The people who would promote racial ideas would tell you, though, that's not the case. But there is no genetic justification of any sort.
For any sort of
racial division.
Yes.
David, at the risk of going into semantics, although I do think semantics are quite important.
Me too.
Where does ethnicity come into the game?
Ethnicity is culture.
Okay.
So I'm thinking of, there's a wonderful woman in Australia. She was born, actually, she was South Sudanese. She was born in a refugee camp, and she's become a fairly prominent lawyer and an activist. And she describes herself as an Australian of African appearance, which I think is a really wonderful way of putting it. So her ethnicity, if you want to say that, well, it's a combination. She has elements in her ethnicity of a South Sudanese ethnicity. There are many South Sudanese ethnicities, right?
Yes.
And also as an Australian. I say part of my ethnicity is Ashkenazi Jewish, and a much more of it is simply being an American. Ethnicities are not thought of or should not be thought of as in any sense innate. They're adopted. If I had a child, if I as a child had been adopted by a Chinese family, my ethnicity would be Chinese, right? They can be acquired and they can be
yes.
unacquired. Whereas the
Yes.
idea of race it's like a life sentence.
Yes.
Though
Inherent.
in many cultures, and I'm talking as a South African, I think race and ethnicity had become conflated.
That's correct.
I think that happens, and I think that is part of the dehumanization process that we talk about, because to acknowledge ethnicity is, in my opinion, probably it should be fine. There shouldn't be any problem with it. But they began to conflate this myth of race with ethnicity, and in some countries in the world more so than in others. And I think that contributes to the conflation of those two ideas, which one definitely has value and is real, which is ethnicity if it is expressed as culture, which I think it is, but then to conflate that with this idea of race.
You're absolutely right, Tercia. The ethnicities are very easily racialized. When but that process is the outcome of social forces that make it convenient for that to happen. So in the United States, the category Hispanic or Latino has become racialized. The category Muslim has become racialized. It happens a lot, and to such and it's not helped by the fact that people often use the word ethnicity as a euphemism.
Yes, they do. Can I say that these things are all right if they're self-chosen, but it's the imposition of a label onto somebody else that's obnoxious.
Yeah, and the problem, of course, is that these things are typically or very often imposed on children before they're in a position to test and built into their identities. So that's a real problem, because then challenging some of these notions of race feels like an attack. It feels like you're trying to take away something that's important to a person for their sense of who they are.
Especially in the world today where so many of us are obviously hybrids.
Well, all of us are. Go back 10 generations, and the ancestry just ramifies outward.
But for a while, it wasn't so obvious, was it? Because the world wasn't so mixed up. We had pockets of Western Europeans and Ashkenazi Jews, for example. But since the jumbo jet, we've all interbred. And so more of us...
We were intervening long before that. I mean, there are often barriers, to some extent geographical barriers, although the evidence is population has flowed around those. So for instance, the Sahara only became desertified maybe 6,000 years ago. So even these barriers, people overestimate them. There certainly have been cultural barriers. Jews in Europe, unless the women were raped by Christians, basically it was endogamous, right? Jews reproduce with Jews, but that was because of cultural barriers. That was because of ideologies of segregation.
Which is the same ideology that makes quite a lot of Pakistanis marry their cousins.
Sure. And it's a terrible shame, I think.
Indeed.
I want to ask about your use of the word hierarchies. And there's certain words that make me think of Jordan Peterson, whom I have to declare my bias. I have a very strong disaffection for...
Good. I would hope so.
I'm not a fan.
No.
But I know that he uses the word hierarchy often, and when you talk about hierarchy, and because it sounds to me as if it's an important idea in the whole concept of dehumanization.
It is indeed, but it's delusional, right?
Yes.
Because human beings are human beings.
Yes.
So the notion of hierarchy of nature is it's just false, right? There isn't any such thing. Now, Peterson, who I utterly despise.
Can I play this game too? I think he's an eloquent fraud.
Yeah, he is. He is an eloquent fraud. Sometimes the eloquence, though, in fact, very often turns out to be word salad, which comes so rapidly that it's difficult to understand.
I was just going to say, I think he's just a fraud. I don't think he's an eloquent fraud.
Well, let's put it this way. He's got a knack for getting people to think he's an eloquent fraud.
Yes.
So he talks about hierarchies of competence. That's his catchphrase, and it has nothing to do with.
Yeah.
Of course, there are hierarchies of competence. That's not some kind of great idea. There are in other words, let's put it more simply, which is something Peterson never likes to do. There are people that are better at some things than other people.
Yes. We show the population exhibits variation in all characteristics.
Yes, that's right.
Well, I don't know if I'm no philosopher, but I think that is it what you call hierarchies of competence. I think that is demonstrably true because it's a very natural thing.
Yeah.
Now, some cheetahs are better hunters than others.
Of course.
Some deer are better at running away than others.
Of course, that's just variation. That's variation, as Darwin taught us. That's nature is nothing if not varied.
That's right. Our reproductive technique is not photocopying.
Exactly. We're not unicellular organisms, right?
But at the risk of taking over, which is something I tend to do, I want to just circle back to this whole idea of intrinsic value.
Yeah.
And what was the other use? So because to me, and I don't think I'm that far off because you mentioned it, that the dehumanization means that you subtract from the value of another human being.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that makes it possible for you to engage. Well, it's one of the factors that makes it possible to engage in the dehumanization.
That's correct. Yeah. That's a psychological disposition that one of them that makes dehumanization possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a horrible weapon that's been used to heinous effect.
Yeah, so it's worth mentioning, I think, at this point that by the most dangerous kinds of dehumanization involve not just seeing the dehumanized other as a less than human animal, but as a demonic or monstrous being. And, in the secular world, of course, demons don't cut it anymore. In the Middle Ages, certainly, that was the case. And in very conservative religious communities, it still is.
Yes.
In the secular world, there are equivalents, right?
Uh-huh.
So you might call someone a Nazi.
Yes.
Right, and that's a secular equivalent of they're demonic, they're evil to the core.
Yes,
and so on. And the demonizing and monsterizing of people is so dangerous because, of course, if you're fighting monsters, anything goes. There's no mercy. There's no.
Yes.
But that's why I still love having these conversations because. I've thought about these things and I've watched many things and listened to many things, but I've never thought about dehumanizing as sort of an upward dehumanizing, because if you make somebody a demon,
Yeah.
If this is the level of humans,
Yeah.
we tend to think of dehumanizing as making it subhuman.
Yeah.
But you can also make it superhuman. And in some ways, that's even more dangerous, because that means that you not only they are more threatening.
Yes.
Because
Again, it's a really important distinction here. First of all, like racialization, dehumanization is always reciprocal, right? It grants the dehumanizer a certain status and the dehumanized a lower status.
Uh-huh.
Now, it's very common, in fact, it's virtually universal, in my opinion, that dehumanized people are seen as possessing superhuman powers, but not superhuman value.
Uh-huh.
So, for instance, Nazis thought of Jews as having this demonic, superhuman intelligence. That's why they were seen as such a formidable foe. In the United States, people of African descent were seen as being insensitive to pain, of
Yes.
being unnaturally strong, of having huge sexual
Yeah.
appetites, and so on.
Yes.
So that's very often an aspect of dehumanization. But that's something separate from the idea of having greater value.
Uh-huh. Yes. So, can you define value?
No, because I don't think value is an objective feature of the world.
Yes.
I can say that we value things, that's for sure. So if something has a value to me, that's nothing spooky about that. But value is an intrinsic property. I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
Because I have an argument with a keen amateur philosopher over this.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for your support.
Okay. Something else should be said at this point, if you just permit me one point, because it's really important. Dehumanization is not a spontaneous phenomenon. People get us to dehumanize others, people in positions of authority, people who we regard as experts, people who we defer to. And that could be a religious leader, it could be a scientist, it could be a politician, a propagandist. There are many people who are placed in these roles. And it's these. So think of it this way. Look, what do our eyes tell us when we encounter another member of our species? Our eyes tell us this is a human being, right? Now, people in positions of authority, epistemic authority like that, because we grant them that role, we are prepared to discard what our senses tell us in favor of them having kind of a deeper understanding of reality.
Yes.
There's nothing irrational about that. You know, the physicist tells me the chair I'm sitting on is mostly empty space. It doesn't look like it to me, but I accept what the physicist says because the physicist is supposed to know. But the problem is, what if the expert is someone like Joseph Goebbels, or a proponent of race science, or a crazy religious leader who's trying to inspire genocide? Well, that's the other side of the coin, right?
Right.
I want to ask you, Dave. Sorry, John. Do you want to go ahead? Can I go?
Well, I just wanted to pick up on what David's just said, because there is a trap of paying attention to the person with the loudest voice. You know, he's the one with the megaphone, and therefore we're the sheep and he's our shepherd.
Yeah.
And haven't we just seen that going on in the United States?
We're still seeing it going on, right?
Yes.
We've got the presidential election coming up, and I'm very, very worried about how this is going to turn out.
Yes.
What I want to ask, David, is, and I'm getting back to this idea that I always think, or used to think, of dehumanizing as making somebody lesser than I am.
Yeah.
But now you've made me think, and I'd like to hear your opinion.
Yeah.
Or do we as a species also tend to dehumanize another by elevating them to a status that they, and that they don't have in fact, and giving them powers that they don't have, shouldn't have, and in the process of doing so, by elevating them, and in that process, are we dehumanizing them? And then they become almost godlike and untouchable, and then we attach too much value to them. Way more. Is that a form of dehumanization?
I wouldn't. The way I use the term humanism, people use it in a gazillion different ways. The way I use it, I wouldn't consider that dehumanization. I would call that what I call a next door phenomenon. Like racism is next door to dehumanization, and misogyny and homophobia and lots of these nasty things. And I think it's really important to make these distinctions, because these are all things I would hope that we want to do away with. And to effectively intervene, we have to understand how they work in their full specificity. That being said, one of the ways that dehumanization sometimes happens, and this is not an aspect that I have yet studied, it's on my agenda fully, is elevation of ourselves to superhuman status.
Yes.
We can create a kind of moral distance, both by denigrating the other, demoting them on hierarchy, or elevating ourselves. And that's largely the province of certain kinds of religious ideology.
Yes. As Tertius said, that's a sort of a godlike position.
Yeah, we're God's chosen. We're doing God's will. We're special to God.
Yes,
and so on and so forth. And of course, in the ancient world, and this is a theme, actually, I think, in authoritarian politics today. It's just not expressed quite the same way. There were these god kings, right? The king was a god or God's representation.
Yes.
Ever since, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, this has been gaining lots of traction. Here. God protected him. He's God's chosen. He's and so on. And he's really leaned into it too.
Yes, indeed. But so has Biden, because he was asked, wasn't he, if there was any reason that he would quit the presidency, and he said, if the Lord Almighty came down, and
good luck with that.
Yes, but both sides of your political field, and that's not the right word, are up to their eyeballs in godliness. I think you're stuffed, America.
Well, in the United States, that's part of American culture.
Yes.
And anyone who wants to win votes has got to play into that to some degree.
Yes.
So, Biden is a devout Catholic. So, but there's a very important difference between what Biden said there and what Trump says. So I take Biden to have been saying it would take a hell of a lot to convince him to drop out.
Yes.
Right? It really would take this
level of
earth-shattering sort of event, a voice booming from the clouds.
Yes.
Whereas Trump is very explicit. He says, well, God protected me.
Yes.
God made me turn my head at that moment. And of course, he has this huge following amongst evangelicals who see him as a Messiah.
When he says that from the stage, I was going to say pulpit, you should hear the cheers that come back at him. But what was I going to say?
Well, while you think, let me
go
perhaps suggest to a new term. So you have dehumanization on the one hand, and then the one attribute that we humans have that makes us very prone to dehumanization is superhumanization. When we elevate some people to be superhuman, and then most of those people that we elevate for the wrong reasons and that we see as superhuman, suprahuman perhaps is what. So that facilitates and enables the ones who put the superhuman at the supra position to continue with the dehumanization, because you need the suprahuman who's untouchable, who's the chosen one, who's the leader, the great leader.
Yeah.
And most of those suprahumans are very good at teaching the followers to dehumanize the other, whether that be Democrat.
Yes. No, there's a lot of truth. There's another dimension, which actually Freud wrote about in 1923 in his book on group psychology, which is the followers identify with the leader. So in elevating the leader, they elevate themselves. And clever politicians understand the kind of rhetoric that promotes these processes. Clever authoritarian politicians. Propaganda is something I study for obvious reasons, because it plays such an important role in these toxic social processes. And that's why, just by the way, back in 2015, when Trump threw his hat in the ring and I listened to his first speech, I was very alarmed, because he was following precisely a pattern that Hitler and Goebbels.
Yeah.
There's a very
yes
paper published in 1941 called The Psychology of Propaganda, which lays this out, and it was like textbook. And so, I on social media, I was saying, look, this is serious, but my well-meaning, liberal friends metaphorically patted me on the head and said, well, this is just entertainment. No, it's very dangerous.
We couldn't believe it from here, because we saw the parallels between 1930s Germany.
Oh yeah.
And early 20 teens USA.
Yeah, I would say in the States today it's 1932.
Yeah. It's for people from South Africa, well, like me, from South Africa. I watch what's happening in America, and I am absolutely aghast. Because it's as if the entire nation has bought into this fiction of the strong man. And that's
See, that's true. And the Trump folks and Donald Trump himself have been very adept in curating this. Actually, my understanding of a lot of this comes from, obviously I'm a Freud fan, comes from Freud's book, The Future of an Illusion, which is about the psychology of religion. And Freud argues there that religious belief comes from a sense of helplessness, that we're all going to die, and we can't master the forces of nature, and we're helpless in the face of injustice and cruelty. And so just as children, when we were children, we relied on parents to protect us and shield us. It was a basic condition of survival. As adults, when presented with these religious notions, we yearn for salvation by an all-powerful Father. And the authoritarian, this is my extension, and drawing on some later work, leans into that. The authoritarian promises salvation.
Yes.
And in their pitch, it's very interesting. What they do is they first make their listeners feel helpless and insecure, that they're laughing stock of the world and that they're being persecuted. And then they offer, well, join me and unite behind me. There's a message of unity, but only behind the leader, right?
David, I've met a kindred spirit. I am so loving this conversation. You could be me.
Okay. Well, on my Substack, there are 2 articles on this. Basically about Trump, and I'm using the Freud's work on the psychology of religion to throw light on authoritarian leaders, and more specifically on what Trump is doing.
I'm already a big fan of your Substack.
Okay.
I haven't looked at anybody's Substack. I'm still trying to figure out why it's called Substack. So
I don't know why.
But I haven't looked at anybody's, and there's a number of people on there that I want to look at.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the work of Dr. John Wathe, Wathe?
No, I'm not.
Well, check it out. You will find it intriguing because he does a lot of work on the psychology of religion, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Dr. John Wathey, Wathey.
Okay.
I'm surprised that you haven't picked up on his work yet. And then David, I haven't asked. We've spoken so much about dehumanization that we didn't get to the human David at all. Do you have any background in psychology?
In a manner of speaking.
Besides Freud?
In a manner of speaking. So if you want to
go for it. Tell us your background.
Okay, so to understand me, you have to understand that I grew up in the Deep South in the United States, and I'm obviously not a youngster. So this was the 50s and 60s.
Oh, no, really? Not a
Yeah, so those were the days of Jim Crow.
Yes.
Segregation. But I was born in New York City. 1 second, okay?
Yes. Sure. Wow.
Honey?
This is the first job.
I'm still on the podcast. I'll be done soon. Okay. But I was born in New York City. On my mother's side, they were secular Jews, and my father's side from a very Christian missionary family. So hence David Livingstone-Smith. So, if you're not brought up in that sort of rough Southern culture, as a child, you can't help but see there's something really wrong here. Now, I grew up also in an extended family with my maternal grandparents, and my grandmother in particular. She was a brilliant woman. She had to quit school at the age of 14 to work in a sweatshop to help support the family. The father abandoned her and her brothers, but she was self-educated. She was someone who could literally recite Shakespeare for hours. And she had a great interest in racism and genocide and so on. So she helped me understand the world I lived in. And of course, now she and her husband were Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe, from Romania and what's now Belarus. And of course, there are always stories of Ashkenazi Jews from that generation.
Yes, the horrible time they had.
That was really influential for me.
They weren't typical Southern USA people, were
they? They weren't from the South. No, their families came to the States early 20th century, before the Holocaust. They were escaping the pogroms.
Yes.
They lived all their life in New York City and then belatedly moved down with us in Florida.
Yes.
So that left a real deep stamp on me.
Yes.
Later, my trajectory is very checkered and very strange and not to be recommended to anyone. So I'm going to cut to the chase. As my grandmother would say, to make a long story bearable, my first career was as a psychotherapist. A trainer of psychotherapists in the United Kingdom. So I went over to the UK in my 20s. I dropped out of school here. I rejoined my education there, did a PhD at the University of London in philosophy, and came back to the States and basically transitioned to philosophy. But that background in particularly psychoanalysis has certainly been an important component to my work. Now, I say I'm a philosopher, but really I see myself as an interdisciplinary scholar. I'm just trying to figure things out.
Yes.
And drawing on whatever resources offer help in figuring things out.
Yes, we're ants trying to understand the environment.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
One of our former guests, a South African from Franschhoek, just down the road from where I live, is Professor Mark Solms. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I know. I love Mark. Yeah.
He's great, isn't he? Yeah.
We know each other, yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah, I want to get him back on. I actually still want to go and visit him on his farm.
Let's get them both on.
We could. That'd be great.
Yeah.
But you do know that he translated all Freud's...
Oh, I know. The edition has just come out. Yeah, the revised standard edition has just come out. Yeah. It's arm and a leg, so I'm going to have to do without it. But it's a wonderful accomplishment. And I think very, very highly of him.
Yeah,
Do you know,
very-
I'm sorry about this, but
No, John,
yeah.
you have to give me 15 seconds. And
Okay,
David
okay.
I have to ask my question. You know it's coming, John.
Oh,
David.
no.
Yes, we have to.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you believe we have free will?
Well, it depends what you mean by free will.
Ah, that's a good answer.
Well, in the sense that we have a choice. So
We obviously choose things. That's true. Those choices, I think, are all caused by other factors, but that doesn't make them any less choices. I don't believe in magical free will.
No.
I believe that people make choices, and those choices are determined by all kinds of things.
But then are they still choices? So
But
no,
they're
David,
still yeah.
I'm just joking. This is a thing between John and myself. I'm a hard determinist, and John is more of a compatibilist.
I'm a compatibilist, obviously, from what I
Okay.
say.
Okay. So it's what? So it's one. John, are you keeping score? I haven't been keeping score.
No, I'm not. No.
I'm going to keep score from tonight onwards.
Oh,
Okay.
This is not a contest. We don't want a winner and a loser. Don't be silly.
The key issue, if I can take 5 seconds, really, with this is what do we mean by free?
Yeah.
And compatibilist says, well, being free means not being coerced.
Yes.
And the hard determinist thinks of freedom as being caused.
Yes.
Right? I think that's the real dividing line.
Yes.
That's brilliant. I love that.
Very good way of putting it. Yes, indeed. And on that note,
okay, we're going to let's wrap it up now.
I want to be firm about the hour, because that's the name of the show. And if I trap people here and I promise them an hour and then freedom, they're never going to come.
Right. Okay.
So
nice talking to you too.
You have been truly wonderful, David. I'd love to do more of this another day.
Sure. You know where I am.
Indeed. Great. And thank you, Tercia. Stalwart contributions as ever. Say bye-bye. Thank you, audience.
Hey, bye, all.
Future audience, that is.